Hey everybody, welcome back, and to newcomers, welcome. As always, I start out by thanking people. I thank Alec Julian, who's once again acting as engineer producer for this extraordinarily complex multimedia extravaganza. I want to thank Patricia Julian for composing our music. To everybody who has been making donations to support this series and the work of the Endangered Alphabets in general. And I want to thank our special guest, who I'm going to introduce in just a second, for joining us. So let me establish some context here. When I first started carving pieces of text in Indigenous and minority writing systems in 2009, I had gone through the entire range of the A to Z index in Omniglot. And by my calculations and using my criteria, there were probably 33 or 34 writing systems in the world that were sort of on the cusp. They weren't extinct, but they certainly weren't widely supported and in active use. So I thought, okay, so there's 33 or 34 endangered alphabets. So the work that I've been doing since then, my calculation is that there are 150 to 200. And one of the things that's been going on in the last 10 years, obviously, is doing the research to find out what is actually happening in the world. But the other thing that's going on, and this is why this particular Zoom meeting, the last one in the series, is called The Future, is because especially in the last 5 years, there's this extraordinary revival taking place. And it's really two kinds of revival. A revival and revitalization of traditional scripts that have been marginalized, but also a lot of energy going into creating new scripts for Indigenous language communities around the world. And this is all part of this huge surge in developing and demanding respect for Indigenous identity and Indigenous rights. And this started before the events, that are happening all over the world, especially in the United States right now. But the two of them are really sort of coming together. So this presents a very interesting opportunity, but also a set of challenges. For a start, if you start seriously considering giving equal rights, equal respect and attention to Indigenous and minority groups, you have a political problem, because that involves a degree of power sharing, or at least reduction of overt authority by the central government or by a regional government. The second thing it does is that it really presents some interesting educational challenges, because in many parts of the world, and you would have to include the United States in this, the educational tradition has been, here is our national language, that's what we use for our education. If anybody doesn't speak that language, well, they'd better learn it in order to get educated. And there are obviously huge, huge issues with that in terms of marginalizing and disenfranchising people. So the subject that in particular I want to look at today is this question of, how do you create an education system which includes people who speak a variety of different languages and may well also write in a variety of different scripts at home? And how do you do so without being condescending or patronizing or making their educational job harder than everybody else's? And so our guest today is Maung Nyeu. He knows about these educational challenges really from both sides. And growing up in Bangladesh, he really saw at first hand what it was like to be a member of a thriving minority Indigenous community, which was not catered to at all by the standard educational system. And he's just finished his PhD at Harvard, where he's been studying and thinking about how to create this kind of multi-language curriculum for countries like Bangladesh or like Vietnam, for example, which also has more than 50 different indigenous language minorities. So as we move forward, how do we do it? And for once, we have somebody who is not only a scholar, but has also got this sort of first-hand experience. So speaking of first-hand experience, Maung, welcome to our series of talks. And what I would really like you to do is to talk about what your first day of school was like. What happened when you went to school and you encountered education in the Chittagong hill tracts of Bangladesh firsthand?
Ji, Chername Mountainioba, Ju, Shirai Karam, Ayong Maru, Chia E Ekai. Greetings, everyone, and welcome in this session. My name is Maung Nyeu. Thank you, team, for your kind introduction. And what I just said in my language and the languages of 4 other indigenous communities. My community is Marma, and I also say greeting to you in Marma, Chakma, Kokborok, which is the language of Tripura people, and Mro and Lushtai. So these are many indigenous groups in the Chittagong Hill Tracts and more. But before I start, I would like to acknowledge the land on which we sit. I sit in Cambridge, Massachusetts. You are in Vermont. These are the traditional territory of Massachusetts, Wampanoag, in Vermont it is Abenaki, and many other indigenous peoples, and has been a place which has long served as a site for meeting and exchanging ideas among nations. As Tim said, I am from halfway around the world, a place called Chittagong Hill Tracts, which is the southeastern corner of Bangladesh. One of my earliest memory, I think it is many, many years ago, and I was probably 5 or 5.5. And we are living in a remote mountain village. And my mother said, I would take you to school today. So we walk on the mountain path for 2.5 miles. And then she took me to a building, which is a white building on top of the mountain. And she gave me 2 advice. She said, be a good boy and listen to what the teacher says. I don't know about the first part, but on the second part, I tried to listen what the teacher said, and I couldn't understand anything he said, not a single word. This is because he was speaking in Bangla. That is the official language of the country. And I grew up speaking Marma, which is my first language, and also other indigenous languages, Kokborok, and also Chakma. So I could not understand what he said. Then there was a bell ring, and then recess, we went out and we played, and then there is another bell ring, and I followed the kids, and I came back to the room. But maybe I was a little late, but I was trying to understand what he was saying. So he was teaching from the book, and which I could not understand and relate anything. And after a few minutes, he called my name. So I stood up, and he gestured me to come to the front. So I was sitting on the second row on the leftmost seat. I still vividly remember this. And then he asked me to gesture me to open my palm, right palm. And when I opened my right palm, a cane came down. And then one more. And then he gestured to open my left palm, and cane came down again and again. So that day, I went back home walking 2.5 miles, crying all the way. And after I went home, I told my mom, I don't want to go back to school anymore. She says, no way, you have to go to school. You have to learn, you have to study. And late in the afternoon, when my father came back from work, and when we heard that I didn't want to go back to school, he said, impossible. You will get punished if you don't go to school. So next day, my mom prepared me for food. The school opens at 10, but we start working at 8:30. So at 8 o'clock, she put my books in a small bag, and then she prepared me breakfast. And I could not eat the breakfast. And my mom told me much later that she was watching me a little distance, and then she saw that I was looking at the food, and my teardrops are falling drop by drop on the food. And I couldn't eat. So my mom took a pity on me. She says, okay, you don't have to go to school today. So I did not go to school that day, the next day, the next week, the next month, or next year. I dropped out on the very first day of my first grade. So even today in the Chino Hill Tracks, many children drop out in the first or second grade. So that's how my journey started. Of course, I'm highly fortunate, and I had much help from many, many people from local and global to complete my doctoral education from Harvard University. But I think I still remember what happened to many other children and how we can collectively help them to reach their own potential.
So can I just ask a question to clarify that scene in the classroom? So you said something that I think is really worth underlining, which is that even though you are 5.5 years old, you actually spoke all or part of 2 or 3 different languages at that point, because you have this complex linguistic community of indigenous languages where kids would pick up bits of each other's language. So it isn't as if you were not linguistically competent. And the second question I want to ask is, in that classroom when you were there kids from a variety of different language communities, or were they all Mama kids?
Very good question. So in the Chichon Hill Tracks, we have officially recognized 12 indigenous communities. there are more than 12. But also I think the term of indigenous needs to be a little bit clarified in the context of Bangladesh. So in Bangladesh, Bangladesh was born in 1971. Bangladesh government's official position, even today, is that we have no indigenous people in the country. Now, if you ask students, university professors, and many other normal people in Bangladesh, do you have indigenous people? Most of them will say, yes, we do. But this is government official position that we have no indigenous people in the country. So as when in the Chittagong Hill Tracts, since there are many indigenous groups exist and they coexist in the villages or in close proximity. So at home, my parents spoke Marma with me. My uncle, my grandparents spoke Marma with me. But my neighbor is Chakma. And when I was playing with my friend, sometime his mother will invite me to come in and eat fruits or sweets or all kinds of meals that she prepared. And when I go to her house, she would speak with me or with her son in Chakma. And also sometimes she will say 2-3 Marma words. So I grew up in a multilingual environment, and which is true for vast majority of the children in the Chittagong Hill Tracts and also in many parts of the world, is that my first language is Marma, but my second and third language are also indigenous languages. Yes, linguistically, we are equipped to understand multiple indigenous groups that we live in close proximity. My father spoke even 6 indigenous languages. So I think this, but a vast majority of them have a poor schooling outcome in Bangladesh because the education system is a single language policy. And I can share more, but that's what. On the second part of your question, team, is this, can you remind me a little bit about the second part?
Actually, you've sort of answered that one already. And I think everybody is curious. How did you survive? How did you get an education if the education that was provided in, or at least near your village by the government was something that so clearly didn't work for you and for many, many other indigenous children? Tell us about how you wound up getting an education.
So I think this is something that I have to say that I have been very fortunate to be born as a son of this family, of my parents. So I will give you a little back, is that when British Army was fighting the Japanese in the Second World War, and so the British are coming from India and going to Burma. That's where the Japanese soldiers are. So they are passing through the Chittagong Hill Tracts to fight the Japanese. And the British soldiers are, and many of them are Indians recruited as a British soldiers. They were going to the mountains and they needed people to help them in many, many ways, for food, for clothing, specifically sewing, because they needed more clothes as they're fighting a war. And my grandfather at that time knew how to sew clothes. And even though he had very limited English, but the Indian soldiers, part of the British Army, recruited him to be a uh,
A tailor?
tailor. So my grandfather was a tailor for the British Army. And while he was there, my mom, who was a very little girl, get to meet some of those British soldiers. And they asked my grandfather to put my mom to school. My grandfather said, we have no school. And they said, no, 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 we will create a school here, a small school. So that's where my mother got admitted in the school. And my mother received a 10th grade education. When she received 10th grade education, it is not British anymore. It became part of East Pakistan. So when she received the 10th grade education, she is one of the 3 women in the entire Chittagong Hill Tracts who had that level of education. One of 3. And so when she told me that I don't have to go to school, she did not say, I don't have to study. She was cooking in a kitchen, and she would ask me to sit maybe 3 or 4 feet away from her so that the smoke from the cooking doesn't come to my face. And then she would ask me to read loudly. And recent or modern academic research in education shows the value of reading loudly for children, and also how it helps when someone who helps to correct you. And then so I was homeschooled. And after I finished 1st grade, she realized that I still don't know Bangla enough, even though I studied the textbook, that to go back to school. So she homeschooled me 2nd grade. And after I finished 2nd grade, she realized that still I wasn't good enough. And then I finished at home my 3rd grade. Only after my 3rd grade, she thought that I knew Bangla enough, not for the text, but to understand well what the teacher said. So I went back to school on the 4th grade.
So then this journey began where, as I recall, when we first met in 2012, you said that you were the first person from your village, or the first Marma, to be educated in the United States. Was that what happened?
Yes, I think first Marma to be educated in the United States. That is right. And then since then, there are 2-3 other students came. But I think at that time, when I came, I was the first Marma from the Chittagong Hill Tracts. Unfortunately, there are very few students from the region have an opportunity to complete university level education, even today.
So again, when we first met, we were sitting in a cafe on Harvard Square, and you told me, we're now skipping ahead a few years, and you told me about coming across the ruined temple and the monk and getting the idea to found a school, because at this point, if I remember correctly, you went to the University of Hawaii for an undergraduate degree. So by now you've acquired what in the West we would regard as being these kind of legitimate, educational credentials. You've been admitted to Harvard. I don't think you're in the PhD program. I think you're in the master's program at the time, the Graduate School of Education. But the other thing that had happened is that you had started getting involved in educational reform, shall we call it, or at least creating educational possibilities back in the Hill Tracts. Can you tell the story about how that began?
So I was not in the field of education before that. So I graduated from Hawaii, and I was working in Southern California. And I received a phone call that my mom had a stroke. And like any sons and daughter will do, I dropped everything and I went home. At the time, my mother survived the stroke, fortunately, and she could walk with a stick. So even though I am not a very religious person, but I decided to go to a Buddhist temple to pray for her recovery, speedy recovery. So, and I was walking towards the Buddhist temple, and I saw some children on the side of the road, and they are breaking bricks. So I stopped and I asked, "What is your name?" I think he said his name is Maung. I said, "How old are you?" He said,
"Well, I came into existence gradually, but my first day as an assistant was October 4th, 2011.
Sorry, this is the Siri is trying to talk to me. So I think that I asked him, what is, does he go to school? He shook hands. He doesn't go to school. I said, what are your parents? He put his head down. So curious, I asked other passerby about these few children. And they say, oh, these are some of the orphan children. And they are breaking bricks instead of carrying books. The wages, if I consider in the dollar terms, probably 25 cents a day, and also maybe they are also exploited. So I put it aside because I was going to pray. So I went to the Buddhist temple and I started praying. And this is close to 11 a.m. And I hear the cacophony of children. And I was surprised. This is a Buddhist temple. This is 11 a.m. Where did these children come from? So I finished my prayers. And then I went back to the back of the temple and I saw many children, approximately 20, 25 children. They're playing. I asked the head monk of the temple. I said, do these children belong to this temple? He said, yes. I said, do they go to school? And he looked at me with a surprise, saying that this is a temple, not a school. And I am a monk, I'm not a teacher. Then what he explained to me is that this region, Chittagong-Hilltrax region, has gone through militarization, armed conflict, and violence. And those some of the children who become orphan and displaced, and they have no close relatives to take care of, the community bring those children to the temple. And the purpose is that the children will have one meal to eat and a safe place to sleep. And the monks generally get some donation from the local members so he could feed the children. But what I realized that without education, these children will grow up, will have no option but day laborer. In Bangla, we call them coolie. So that led me to think of that this is injustice. These children, all the children in the world, according to the United Nations Declaration, have the rights to be educated. And all the countries in the UN are signatory. But these children are not getting education. And some of them are even day labor. So then I started working with the communities, and with the savings that I have working in the US, we build in a small school. This is my retirement fund, 401k. I would not recommend this for anyone, but I built this school for 12 orphan children. And then it grew to 14, and then 18, and then today we have 3 schools, and we are helping educate more than 1,300 children.
So this is an extraordinary story, and in addition to the children that you are helping in those 3 schools, you're also acting as sort of a consultant for another 12 or 15 schools as well, I believe. Can we talk a little bit about what changes you helped to introduce in these kids' education so that they would be getting an education in this sort of complex linguistic community in an area that is sort of militarized and closed off from the rest of the country, where up until very recently you were getting little or no help from the government of Bangladesh. But I'm really interested now in terms of the innovations that you helped introduce, well, you and your teachers, in terms of changing the kinds of education that these kids got. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I will be happy to share that. And maybe I have few slides that I can share that will help people to understand some of the work that we do. Alec, can I share the screen?
Yeah, you're the host now.
Okay. So let me see if I can share. So you see the screen, right? This is the indigenous languages in Bangladesh. This is in the Chino Hill Tracts, we are talking about 12 indigenous languages, but throughout Bangladesh, we have over 50 indigenous languages. And most of these languages in other parts of the country, except 2 or 3 of them, are on the brink of extinction. That means that there are only few speakers left, or in some cases, there are no speakers left. So, and this is to give you a little background of this. This is the Bangla on the left, which is the official language of the country, alphabets, and on the right side, it is Chakma. So the root of Bangla letters is Indo-Aryan, and otherwise, this Marma and Chakma and other writing systems come from Tibeto-Burman route. Today, less than 1%, I would say less than even 0.1% of Chakma know how to read and write in their mother tongue. And this is true for Marma and many other groups too. Even though this language has existed for many years with alphabets and with writing system. But now the generations 2, 3 before of us were able to read and write. Our songs, our music, our stories are written down. Our proverbs are written in our languages. That majority of the 99% of the children today have no access to that that songs, musics, and stories. So when I ask the communities, they have less than 50 elders alive today who can read and write in the Moro language. So I asked one of the grandmother, what language means to you? She says, our languages are not just tool for communication. They're the way our ancestors speak with us, and through which our children make a meaning of the world around us. And many children drop out in the first, second, and third grade. So what I have realized that even those teachers with a well-intention who come to teach in the Chittagong Hill Tracts, they were not given any special professional development or training on the language or culture of the indigenous children. So what I have started something that this answering your question is that oral story project. And so in the oral story, we have a very rich oral story tradition. And then so the children interview their grandmothers about the stories. And many of them are traditional stories, folk tales, but also stories of their lives. And they're not telling stories for children in one family. These are the children from the entire village gathered around 1 or 2, 3 grandmas, sometimes 2, 3 grandparents team up together to tell the story. So, and I can say a little bit more about it, but here is an example of a grandma telling a story. So after she tells a story and the children come to the classroom and they share the stories they have heard. So you can see that there are children are holding a piece of wood, and this wood, which is carved by Tim Brooks, contains the number of her grade or his grade, and their Chakma, Bangla, and also Kogbra. So, and then they tell the stories. And then when they tell the story, we video record these stories. And then based on those stories, we publish storybooks which are in multiple languages. This particular book, The Legend of Boga Lake, Boga means Dragon Lake, which is in 4 language book. So this is another, which is 5 language book. And so you can see there, this is the book that has the, not just book, contains the cultural knowledge that has been passed down for many generations. In the Chittagong Hill Tracts, indigenous people do not kill dolphin. This is a story of a dolphin saved the life of a little girl. And so, and that is why we don't hurt any dolphins in the Chittagong Hill Tracts. This is a river dolphin. So, and then we have gift of water, which is the traditional practice. I am not going to tell you the whole story now, but it shows that their language as well as their clothing as well as their lifestyle is represented in these stories. And then also it contains the stories of medicinal plants. These are the knowledge that indigenous people had and used for a very long time. And in the Chittagong Hill Tracts, we have scientists found that we have over 190 medicinal plant species. And we have digitized the font, but also we created something probably rare in the world, is a 6-language children's picture dictionary. So you can see it's a flower. There are 4 indigenous languages as well as Bangla and English. And what it does is that it moves from children from a monolingual habitus, that means a mindset that think of one language, to put them into or develop a multilingual mindset. So, and just quickly, we build curriculum based on these stories. So children do role play, they discuss different content of the story, think, pair, share. They have 4 corners. They do presentation after group discussion. And then we have children learning to write in their mother tongue. First time in 70+ years, first generation. So this is a boy who I asked him to write the number system. He, instead of writing just 1, 2, 3, 4, he finished 1, 2, 3, 4 up to 10, and then 20, and then 33. And then I said, stop. So, and his teacher was looking at proudly. And then this is a small video that I asked the boy to write. The video a little shaky because I was the cameraman and a naive cameraman, I must say.
저기 담아라, bro. Now, u join si marma iche go pho SSF yang program me. U join si marma Friday.
Okay, so and also we have the children here learning in Maung and also it improved writing. So I will stop sharing now, but hopefully you get an idea that 99% of the children do not know how to read and write. But these children in the schools and in our partner school, they're learning to write in their mother tongue, as well as the official language, Bangla.
So Maung, thanks so much for taking us through that. So I want to, we're getting onto the Q&A time, but I want to invite people to think about this in 2 directions. Absolutely, I want to invite you to ask Maung questions about the curriculum that he's been developing in the Chittagong Hill Tracts, and we're going to give the URL for the nonprofit that Maung started called Our Golden Hour. We're going to throw that up on a slide at the end of the talk. But the other thing that I want to do is to talk about what I really hope is going to come out of all of this, which is a sort of a transferability where everywhere where there are multilingual communities and minority communities, people start thinking about, well, how do we introduce an education that is equal and fair? So as a result of the work that Maung and his team and my team at Champlain College did on the dictionary, the 6-language dictionary you saw, I worked with the Abenaki community here in Vermont to produce a sort of a similar illustrated dictionary of Abenaki, where I get the same sense of it's not just the words, it's the culture. And I hope that I'm going to have an opportunity to be doing a similar kind of project with indigenous languages and scripts of the Philippines. But yes, in my mind, people start hiring Maung as a consultant and flying him all over the world saying, okay, we really want to do something with our multicultural, multi-language education, but we have no experience because, of course, when Maung's schools started, nobody had any experience there in trying to figure out how to run a classroom, what the materials might be, how you would restructure the classroom in this interactive way that he's been talking about. So what I want to do now is turn the conversation over to questions and answers, and by all means put stuff up in chat, and I can forward Maung a copy of the chat after the whole thing is over. And as always, this is being recorded. I can see the little red light blinking. You can see this afterwards. Other people can see it. You can send the link to people. So yes, let's have questions and comments and suggestions and thoughts. Fire away.
There's a question in the chat if you can see it.
And so this is the question from Nazma Akhtar. What can we, others do as Bangladeshi in order to add more solutions like you brought into our country? So that's a question for Maung. Yeah, how can Bangladeshis outside the hill tracts contribute? How can they help?
Thank you. I think this is a very important point because if you look at the population of Bangladesh and population around the world in general, except few countries, indigenous people are numerically minority. So when it comes to setting national language policy, the central administration, whatever they decide, the indigenous people do not have enough vote to turn over or to convince in a way that unless they see that the need of the children. And I think language policies needs to be changed. So, and to answer Nazma's question, we have to work at different level. So let's talk at the policy level. From the policy perspective, we have to put pressure on the government that the government's goal of educating all children will not be fulfilled if we have single language policy. And Bangladesh is not a new country. This is 50 years. I think that there is plethora of research around the world have shown that a child learns best if you start them in the languages they speak at home. The second part, which is that Tim, you started asking me, I speak 2-3 languages, that there is a myth that if a child learns 2 languages or 3 languages, that will impede their learning in their main language of education, which based on the data, I would say is false, is that a child can learn 2-3 languages, writing system in 2-3 languages easily. And many places can show that. So that's at the policy level. But even if you don't think of the policy level, we have some local organizations have been working, and we are the other group in the Chittagong Hill Tracts, and this is for Najma's answer, is that the Save the Children has been working in Bangladesh, in the Chittagong Hill Tracts, as well as throughout the Bangladesh. So Save the Children started few mother tongue-based multilingual education, but only from K1 and K2 or K, but do not go to the first grade. And Save the Children share their finding with the government, and Save the Children's funding stop, global funding. So that whole thing has stopped. And I think this is a sad story that the program that has been successful now fully stopped. And there is though one silver lining is that the government finally looks at all the benefits, and in around 2009 or 2010, government changed, say, okay, we will have indigenous language base for some education for 3 or 4 indigenous languages in the Chakma Hill Tracts. So government has published a book, but vast majority of these schools in the Chakma Hill Tracts, the education remains a dream unfulfilled in their mother tongue. Because even though you publish the book, few textbook, the teachers have not had any experience in teaching in their mother tongue. So I communicated to the district education officers in the Chakma Hill Tracts that they need to prepare more teachers. But I think people from different parts of Bangladesh can play a role, not only just in the Chakma Hill Tracts, that bring this awareness to the national conscious, is that you are from Bangladesh, you know that 21st February is a mother tongue in Bangladesh, Mother Tongue Day, International Mother Language Day. But if you put yourself in the shoes of a child, when I was in the 4th grade, 5th grade, I go to celebrate 21st February, Mother Language Day, with singing that, you know, how can we forget those who sacrifice for our mother tongue? And as I grow a little older, I realized that I don't even speak, I don't even know how to write in my mother tongue. So I think that this is something that to bring more awareness and also to support the local organizations in developing and maintaining mother tongue-based education system. There are few, and then we need to support them. Not just hill tracts. As I said, in the Bangladesh, there are over 50 indigenous languages, and most of them are almost on the brink of extinction. Once they are extinct, it will be very hard if there is no single speaker left to bring them back.
I would also add, again, to sort of broaden this out on a global level, if we look at the experience in Morocco, for example, it's very similar. So actually, the Moroccan government back in 2001 set up a specific branch, a specific institute for the study and support and teaching of the Amazigh languages in Morocco. And they've done an amazing job of beginning to write and create school books and materials like that. But even with that, there is a tremendous shortage of teachers who can speak the Amazigh family of languages and can read the Tifinagh script. So there are several layers of complexity here. Okay, we've got a bunch of other questions. Luke, you've got your hand
up. Which one?
Luke Pound.
Hello.
Yes, please,
I'm
go
on
ahead.
audio and video. Hello, so my name's Luke Pound. I am an undergraduate at Clark University in Worcester, Massachusetts. I am a psychology student and I'm studying specifically bilingual education, dual language programs in Worcester. So these programs are, I suppose, similar to mother tongue programs in the sense that they are a multilingual educational environment. But dual language programs tend to have many different structures, some of them just having language second half of the day in another language with same subjects, sometimes kind of integrating the two languages at the same time, other times having more focus on the quote unquote foreign language. So I was just wondering what perhaps like a day in the mother tongue program is like, or what kind of structure is there in order to provide an educational space for all the languages that are being presented?
This is a very good question. I think even those countries who have allocated room for indigenous language-based education, government initiatives, even at best, become transitional bilingual. That means that just to make sure that you get to 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th grade, and then after that, you drop the entire indigenous languages and started teaching in the official languages. So the transitional bilingual program is still, I think, fall way short of the spirit and the goal of indigenous language-based education. A truly bilingual education should have programs in both languages through entire schooling system, and preferably opportunities to study and research at the university level. And I think it is possible. There are few examples of bilingual programs. One example is in Maori, people in New Zealand, but again, they are not perfect, but I think that they have done better than many other communities in the world. It is that we don't fall into trap of this transitional bilingual program and creating content that is not just taking a Bangla content and translating it to indigenous language. It still falls short because you are teaching the same thing that children cannot relate to their own lives in their mother tongue. So, and that's why we have collected indigenous indigenous stories and created content so that the content reflects the lived experience of indigenous students. And one other thing I would like to say is that even when we talk about indigenous knowledge, people stop right there, but indigenous knowledge book creates the content, but there is also the process, indigenous ways of knowing, how they see the world. And I think that has to be incorporated within the education system. And we are far, far away from it.
Okay, next, Patrick Dajia. Patrick, come and join us. What's your question?
Hi, Maung. Just thank you a lot. I really appreciated this talk. Personally, because I feel a connection with this area as well. My family is Sylheti, but I did not grow up speaking Sylheti because, it was discouraged. And it's another one of those languages which also has a lost alphabet, which, has been lost to the time. I think I kind of want to expand on Luke's question here. Do you, in your mother tongue teaching process, do you make sure that the languages are integrated in their education? Because what I'm expecting is when you grew up in these multilingual communities, you would speak Chakma and Marwa together, right? You would flow in and out of them, you would code switch between them, and you wouldn't necessarily, your knowledge of, say, Chakma wasn't as great as your knowledge of Marwa. When you're teaching Chakma and Marwa in the classrooms, are they different languages taught separately? Or are they rather just taught through stories and you don't really care how they integrate, if that makes sense?
Very good question. So this is more of a process. So I think, so we have, say, Chakma student, Marma student, and then so in the hill tracts, we have 3 districts. So there is Bandarban, which is primarily Marma, Rangamati, which is primarily Chakma, and then Khagrachori, which has more Tripura, and it is border with Tripura state of India too.
Yeah.
And then so they have, and I understand the Sylheti because I have few Sylheti friends that I grew up with. And
my mom grew up in Shillong, and she grew up next to Khasi and Garo.
Yes.
They all,
yes.
grew up speaking that together. But in school, since only Bengali was allowed, they were only allowed to speak that.
Yes. And I think this is a challenge, and not just for the Chittagong Hill Tracts, but I am afraid that most of the indigenous languages in Bangladesh outside Chittagong Hill Tracts will be extinct, except 2-3, like Garo, Khashia, except those 2-3. And I think that, so as a process, we have the Marma students taught by Marma teachers, and then Chakma students are taught by Chakma teachers.
Okay, all right.
So that's how we have organized these classes, because that way I think that even though the child understands the second language, we wanted to make sure that they develop the best
Okay, yeah,
best
I
teacher
understand that.
support that they get.
You make sure that they achieve competency in one language, you know,
Yes.
and they can interact with students in those other languages. That's good. Secondly, kind of a personal but not necessarily question, is that I'm assuming you also teach Bengali at these schools, right? Because learning Bengali is really important to the outcomes of these children. What is their relationship like, and your relationship as well, to Bengali? Because it is not your own language, but also it is the only language that, because it's also not English, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think for practical purpose,
Mm-hmm.
to be successful in Bangladesh, you must know Bangla well. Not only just know, but know Bangla well. So we make sure that our students know Bangla too. But when you start at the kindergarten, there is no Bangla. We don't even introduce Bangla.
Okay, yeah.
Now, UNICEF has programs in the Children Hill Tracks. They start introducing Bangla from the kindergarten, not the mother tongue, which is, I mean, coming from that kind of perspective, I think it is not the best solution. So in the kindergarten, it is only Marma. And then in the first grade, it is also primarily Marma. And then from the second grade, we gradually introduce Bangla. And I
That
think
makes
that
sense.
the goal for them is to be very good in Marma, but also at the same time, they have to know well in Bangla, because sadly, because I don't agree with this policy, that we have national exams in the fifth
I
grade
agree.
and in the 8th grade. And if you fail in those exams, which is only in Bangla, you will know school will take you in the 6th grade. And I think then we have to make sure that our children know also Bangla. So it is not either or. That's the myth, as I was saying, is that a child can learn 2 languages easily.
Of course, yeah.
So interestingly enough, exactly the same problem happens in this country in areas where there are total immersion Cherokee programs. So the Cherokee, there are, roughly speaking, 2 areas of concentration in the country, and they've done an amazing job of developing these sort of kindergarten up total immersion programs where they're learning, they're in all day in Cherokee and using the Cherokee syllabary. The problem they run into is that because they are also kids being educated within the United States, they have to take national exams in English. I don't remember what the youngest age they do, but it means that there's a kind of a guillotine that comes down at that point. So sort of a deadline that says, yeah, it sort of doesn't matter what else you've been doing. At this point, you have to take this exam. I believe things are different in Canada. I've talked to some people who've been involved in Indigenous mother tongue education there, but I can't speak for certain on that. Okay, we can take a couple more questions. We've got a question here on chat from Ho Yoon Park. Among minority languages, well, there can be different accessibilities to education. Besides Marma and Chakma, there will be many others. Yeah, absolutely true. And there is Bangla and English that children need to learn. How could you manage those different accessibility languages? Right, so the challenge there is, and you see this also happening in the Philippines, is that once you start saying, okay, we're going to be inclusive and we're going to include one of the traditional indigenous languages, then you're kind of recreating the situation one step down, because that means you're still excluding some of the others. And so I'm curious, obviously, Maung, this is something that you've given a lot of thought to, is this kind of inclusiveness. I'm curious as to whether you know of schools elsewhere in the Chittagong Hill Tracts who where there are different kind of blends of Indigenous languages being spoken, whether they're also trying to give access to the Indigenous kids in that area.
Very good question. I think that there are, if I go back to the little bit of history here, is that when Pakistan and India became independent from Great Britain, Pakistan created a language policy for Pakistan. And the language policy says Urdu will be the national language of Pakistan. Now, Urdu was spoken in the entire Pakistan, only less than 4% of the population. And Bangla was spoken probably over 48 to 50, over 50% of the population of the entire Pakistan. So obviously that Bangladesh, the Bengali people, raised against this, and they went to protest and they died for it. And those 5 young men became the language martyr. They are revered, but also that language movement galvanized Bangladesh's independence movement from Pakistan. So it shows that not respecting the other languages. Unfortunately, when the independence of Bangladesh happened in 1971, 1972 says, well, you know, we all have just Bangla, right? And which I say, you know, it's a classic case of oppressed become oppressor. And so in the Chittagong Hill Tracts, the majority among the indigenous group is Chakma, and then second is Marma, third is Tripura. And Tripura speak Kokbora. If we disregard other languages, we are perpetuating what Pakistan has done to Bengali people and what Bangladesh has done to us, right? So I think this has been in my mind, and I can share probably just one screen. So you can see that, you know, in the books that we publish, we have incorporated multiple languages. And let me see if I can go back to one other language, which is, it is that what we have shown before is that at the top we put the Mro. That means that among this language group, you know, who are the less less speaking group, and we put them on top, and we make sure that these are the alphabets. These are not our end goal, but this is our beginning. Is that we are very careful in incorporating the Mro language in our education curricula, and then also have the Mro children to learn the opportunities in Mro. Even though Bangladesh government changed some of the educational policies and then started publishing the textbook in indigenous languages, that doesn't include Mro. But we consciously decided that we should not ignore the minorities among us. And then so we have created curriculum that based on the Mro stories, the Dragon Lake, you know, it is from the Mro and Kumi groups, and then so we are incorporating. So the goal is to have students from different groups have the opportunity to learn in their first language. Are we perfect? No, we are not even close. But we have started gradually getting even smaller groups of indigenous people. I think the question sometimes some people bring is that there's a cost. There's a cost of publishing books and in multiple language. I think we have to balance it, thinking of what is the cost of not giving education opportunities to a child. And also it is that in the area where we have no people or no children, we can have the no book published for them. And then those who are in the Chakma majority schools, we can have the Chakma books there. So I think the cost argument to me is somewhat premature, and also it is short-sighted.
I think we need to wrap it up at this point. Thanks to Maung for being our guest, and to all of the people who've been posting questions or asking questions. We're going to put up a slide with the websites for Endangered Alphabets and also our Golden Hour, which is the nonprofit that Maung started. Clearly, we're going to welcome questions and comments and follow-up. Somebody asked whether the books that our Golden Hour has published, whether they're going to be available. So again, Maung can answer that one. And I hope two things. First of all, I hope that you share this particular video with anybody who's interested in multicultural affairs, Indigenous affairs, and especially multicultural education. And I want to thank those of you who have come and joined many of this series of 8 Zoom meetings. I had no idea exactly how this was going to go, and it has been absolutely wonderful. And I'm going to leave them available on YouTube for a little while, and then I'm going to do the Disney thing of taking them down so you start missing them, and then we'll probably do them as reruns at some point. And of course, I'm also happy for suggestions for other talks or programs at some point in the future. So with that, thanks to everybody. I hope you all stay well and stay healthy. I hope we get through this crisis the world is going through right now. And at some stage, we look back on it and we kind of breathe a sigh of relief. All right. Thanks again, Maung. Take care, everybody. And we'll see you around.
Maung,
Thank you, everyone. And then just following up what Tim was saying, it is that we have the books are available on our website, ourgoldenhour.org. I am putting this page on the screen, and this work is a collaborative work of many people, both local and global. Please feel free to contact me, any questions that you may have. I know this is a short time, so I probably didn't get a chance to answer all of your questions. And thank you, team and Alec, for inviting me for this talk. And I look forward to connecting with you at some point in the future. And I thank you everyone for joining, and please feel free to stay in touch and stay well. And I hopefully will be able to connect at some point in the future. Thank you.